believe we're on.
You didn't find him?
No, but
All right, we're going to come to order. Today is the regular meeting of it's the November 4th, 2009 regular meeting of the Glendale Planning Commission. Can we have roll call, please?
Commissioner Schitz.
Here.
Commissioner Torgerson.
Here.
Commissioner Lee.
Here.
And Chair Kane.
Here. Report regarding posting of agenda.
The agenda for the meeting was posted on Wednesday, October 28th on the bulletin board outside City Hall.
All right. Would everyone rise and join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Agenda item 4, approval of minutes from October 21st. I have some comments. Does anyone else?
Over to you.
All right. Before we had a motion thrown out by someone, on page 7, second paragraph from the bottom, where it noted that that Chairman Kane clarified the Planning Commission makes strategic decisions and so on. I actually think that was Commissioner Torgerson that first drew that thought. So if we could correct that. And then below that,
I mumbled it, and you just clarified.
and below that, again, continuing Chairperson Kane remarks, second sentence, he requested the applicant to explore other options, blah, 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 that are reasonable and support the building. Of course, I support it's just a...
It's supported.
And supported, thank you, yes. It was just a tense thing with the...
Okay.
And then on page 14, just a note because of my father being an architect, under applicants, on page 14, applicants, Mr. Franco Navarian, architect for the project, I'm thinking he was probably the designer. An architect would require registration, and I'm not sure that he was. And then under page 15, it said that he stated that the Planning Commission approved the variance. I'm sure he requested that we do so. And under discussion from commissioners, we were concerned about precedent. And not that it would be precedent setting, that we were concerned that would be precedent setting. And that's why we asked the owner to get the Homeowners Association to amend the bylaws to eliminate the potential for a precedent. And then finally, under the motion, we're a commission, not the council. You have that the council hereby approve, and of course it would be the commission approving.
Oh, good catch.
Other than that, could we have a motion to approve as amended? Seeking support?
I'll second it.
A motion and support, call roll on approval of the minutes.
Commissioner Schitz.
Aye.
Commissioner Torgerson.
Aye.
Commissioner Lee.
Aye.
Chair Kane.
Aye, and a vote of 4-0, the approval of the minutes of October 21st as amended were approved. Oral communications, I have nothing. Zoning appeals, we have none. Planning Commission items, we're going to go a little bit off agenda. We may lose a commissioner toward the end of the meeting, and for hearings, I want to have as many people as possible. One of the people, we're waiting for their group to arrive, so we're going to go with my fellow commissioners' permission to go with agenda item, I guess it would be 8, new business. Item B, Special Recreation Zone Development Plan, review case number PSR 2009-002. It's located at 1714 Kenyatta Boulevard. It's APN 5652-004-800. The applicant is Robert McCormick of McCormick Consulting. The property owner is the city of Glendale, and it's a request to expand and alter an unmanned wireless telecommunications facility operated by Verizon Wireless located in the Babe Herman Baseball Field, Verdugo Park, by installing a third antenna support structure and one new panel antenna to the existing 60-foot high monopole, and replacing 2 existing panel antennas and relocating 2 other existing ones for a total of 3 antenna support structures and 15 antennas. The staff, represented by Christopher Baxter, would you give us an overview and the recommendation?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, over here on this, all these panels here is our project. Very briefly, in your staff report, we have a project to expand and alter an existing wireless telecommunication facility, specifically the monopole. Now, the monopole as it exists, here's kind of a blow-up of it, has 2 of these support structures with 7 antennae on it. And they want to add another support structure, put a new antenna here, relocate a couple off here, over here, and replace a couple on these. So you have a total of 3 of these support structures with 15 antenna. And so really this is the main thing here. Now, we have some photographs. These are the photographs, and this is the simulation, this piece right here. And you can see it in different locations around. Now, it's in the Babe Herman Baseball Park, which is on the east side of Cañada, and in this little area right here, you can see the zones around here, the SR zone. There's a multifamily across the wash over here, which is about 100 feet up. You have your other SR zone and R1 zone north of the baseball field itself and north of the fire station. Then this gives you some land use. See the land use. That's pretty straight information. Not much else to it as far as the project description. A little background. When the project was first reviewed back in 1995, we did an environmental review, which should be attached to your staff reports. And part of their environmental review, they had 3 concerns back in those days. One was the electromagnetic fields. There was a concern about growth-inducing impacts. And then there was the aesthetics. The Environmental and Planning Board, which reviewed those projects back in those days, determined that really only one of those issues was an issue, and that was the aesthetics. Subsequently, the Federal Telecommunications Act of '96 stated that only the federal government can regulate the effects of radio frequency. And so the commission, so the Environmental Planning Board had some mitigation measures which were implemented along with conditions of a conditional use permit, which was also required at the time. So the administrator approved that. And then there was a third review, which was the Planning Commission, as far as the planning department approvals. Now, there was a recent question here, and we've done a little shuffling kind of quickly here to see if we can try to catch up. So we had a commissioner made an inquiry about the Parks and Recreation Department's role. Now, this planning department does not specifically have that commission within our jurisdiction, but the park staff did give us some background, and they said that as far as they're familiar, the Parks and Recreation Commission does not have approval authority. If they had reviewed the project, it would have been reviewed as either as an information piece or as possibly some type of recommendation to City Council, which would have approved the lease for the use of the property within a city park. And so this ordinance here, back in '95, occurred, the City Council approved that. This is more of an information background. Based on that, we have the City Council then came in later on and said, we don't need to do a conditional use permit anymore. And if we're going to let this be a permitted use in these zones, the SR zone, if there's no changes and all, but in this particular case there was, and so the Planning Commission has authority, and I've cited the ordinances here for you to reference. I believe they're also attached. So at this point, the planning staff feels that the previous project was built according to mitigation measures and the conditions of previous approvals, and that the new proposal is a de minimis addition. It's a small addition of just this one armature with a couple of new antenna, with one new antenna and a couple of readjustments of existing ones. And so we would recommend to the Planning Commission an approval of this project with conditions. And we've listed some conditions. Did you get it? Oh, excellent.
Yeah.
Laura, could we flip that on too? Didn't anticipate being first members of the commission. I think you do the...
You can do that.
Can you flip on this over here? It's one of those... So I didn't anticipate that, so I didn't put this up on the screen, so I apologize for a little bit delay. But anyway, so to us it was, we felt there was a de minimis. Here you go. There, this is perfect. Now, if I could just mention, we cannot touch the screen or else it'll just jump all over creation. But if you'll notice here, you can see we're looking at it from the south, looking north. Here's the baseball field. Here's Cañada. Here's the wash. Across the way, you'll see the rooftops of the apartment building, or I believe it's a condominium now. And here's our power pole, and you can see the two armatures. I'm calling them armatures. I believe they have a more technical term for it, with the existing monopoles. And then right down here, you'll see that equipment room that's surrounded by a chain link fence with the green slats. And there's landscaping around there as well. I went out and did a site inspection. I also talked to Park and Recreation staff, and they said that it was all up to meeting the codes and mitigation measures, conditions. So that was okay. And there is no expansion here. It's up there. That's going to be the extension.
When was this photo taken?
Wolf, what do you think? Are these 2 or 3 year old photos?
3, 4, 5.
All right.
Yeah, something along that. But anyway, as I was kind of summing up before this came up to help us out, was that the planning staff does recommend approval because we feel that this added addition there is fairly de minimis. And we do have some conditions that we, planning department puts pretty much some boilerplate type conditions. There's 4 of them. Basically saying they have to comply with the plans that they submitted. And then there's a Parks and Recreation condition that we have here that says that the applicant has to work with Parks and Recreation with the agreement that they have with the Parks and Recreation. And then one with Water and Power on any issue relating to the electrical use for that facility. That pretty much wraps up my staff report. I'll do my best to answer any questions if you have, sir, or gentlemen.
For standard, sit.
I can sit. I have no problem.
Whatever you'd like.
Let's go ahead and sit. I just kind of wanted to be up there just in case you...
Questions from the commission? Mr. Sheets?
Let's see. I did have a couple questions after reviewing the site. Let me
While you're gathering that, I just want to let the representative know you should fill out a card, whether you do it before or after you speak. Go ahead, Mr. Sheets.
I don't know whether to address this to speaker or, well, let me bring it up. My first concern is that we have some action, some activity taking place on the cellular site placement. And in fact, the city is preparing some legislation as we speak, and in fact, I think there's a meeting tonight with the public to get input. So I have some concern that we're addressing an issue which is going to be part of that legislation as far as making changes or upgrades to existing sites. So having said that, I had a couple questions relative to the site, and if they're not items that you would answer, then I'll address it to the speaker. But
Sure.
I did notice on this site, and in the past we had some changes on sites up near the sports complex, and I had noticed some items there. And one that comes to mind is if you can see on this existing picture, up by the array of antennas just to the left, kind of adjacent to where the new bracket will go, there's something that it's like a microwave antenna.
Dish.
A dish. So it's my thoughts about that, or my questions are, one, is that part of the wireless activity relative to the placement of this site, or is that something in addition? I'll put out and then, because I don't know if you...
Yes, I was going to say, if I could, if you want, if we respond, that was reviewed. There were actually allowances, I believe, for 3 dish antennas the last time this was heard back
Okay.
in '95.
All right.
So I believe there's only one out there now, and there's some lights, which were also addressed back as far as back in '95, too.
So they were added at that point, or was it something that was part of the original placement?
Part of the original placement. I think there's less than what was allowed.
Okay.
I can double-check it, but I know there was a discussion of 3 dish antennas at the time.
Okay, there aren't 3 out there now, but...
No, there's not.
Yeah.
No, you're correct. That's closer to what it looks like now. And there are some lights for the ball field, but that was also
Correct, which
discussed.
is, something different. Well, that was my main concern, because I know that, and maybe the remainder of my comments will be relative to conditions should we move forth on this, because the poles near the sports complex added the antennas, I think, after the fact, and I want to make sure that in our movement forward that we address that issue as far as what goes in, what's added to the site, and what's appropriate to be on the tower or the monopole. So that's all I have for now.
Okay. I have any other questions from commissioners? All right. A couple. One you addressed, because I was curious what Parks and Rec had to say for their input. No one's here, but you've spoken with them. Did they comment on the upkeep? Were they happy with
Yes.
what the telephone company had done in terms of the upkeep and maintenance of the facility?
Yes. They were satisfied that what's out there now is consistent with what the conditions and mitigation measures.
All right. Do you happen to know, did they then, and again, if you don't, we'll ask the speaker, do you know, did Parks and Rec then negotiate a new lease because of this intensification?
They will be doing that. If you'll note here, on this particular one, that the ordinance I handed you, that came subsequent to the Planning Commission, the zoning administrator decision, and all that.
But
Then council passed that.
So 1995 to 2005 would be the first 10 years, and then 2 5-year.
Yes, and there was a subsequent
They've already done a
5-year.
5-year addition, so
Yes.
in another couple of years, 2010, they'll have to do one more.
Yes, sir. That's correct.
But again, they're adding more antennas, so with the change of use, that should trigger a brand new lease agreement, or certainly there should have been some controls within the terms of the leases, the number of antennas.
Yes.
Probably outside your purview.
Yes. We had invited Parks and Recreation. They also had a commission meeting this afternoon, and there may be some conflicts going on with their staffing at that time, but they weren't able to attend. But we did make a request.
And then finally, and again, if you know, great, otherwise we'll ask the speaker, the existing pole is remaining, they're just adding a new mast?
Yes, sir. The mast being that third, I'm calling it like an arm or a support
Arm
structure.
is fine.
Okay.
Yeah, that's probably
Yes,
a better way
yes,
to
sir.
describe
That
it.
would be correct. There's only, everything remains the same except the addition of that arm.
All right, that's all I had for now.
All right, sir.
Okay. The only speaker card that I will have, I'm sure, will be from the representative, so if you'd like to address us.
Thank you, Commission. My name is Robert McCormick, at 27 Via Granada, Rolling Hills, California, 90274.
Do you have anything you want to say, or you're just here to address any of our
making myself
questions?
available for
All right.
answer your questions. Specifically, I did speak with Parks and Rec yesterday, Coco, and we are working concurrently with reviewing the lease agreement and, if necessary, amending the lease, because we're really only adding one antenna on that on the arm shooting to the southwest. We're actually moving some antennas from the other two arms over, two antennas over from the other two sectors, and then swapping out the type of antenna on the other two sectors. So we're only adding net one antenna.
So I'm just curious, how do you establish what a fair lease rate is? I mean,
Well, for this particular site, I'm not aware exactly how many antennas the site is approved for. I believe it's 21. So in that case, we're still under the requirements of our lease. However, I think you guys are renegotiating all of your leases so that the options are more or less being reconsidered, and then new leases will be drafted up as the leases expire. So I've done a couple over on Fern Lane as well. So I think they're on a case-by-case basis as the options expire.
Yeah, you've been here before.
Yeah, I've been here before.
Recently, yeah.
questions for the speaker?
Yes. The new antennas, will they be the exact same size?
Exact same size, yeah.
As these? And the fact, if it's 21, that means you'll be back, should they choose to
After,
expand?
if we need to add some more, we'll have to come back, and actually Christopher and I talked about that, but right now Verizon would just like to stay at 15, so if we need more, we'll come back.
I don't have any further questions.
Mr. Lee?
Well, I just had a question. When you say 21, right now you have 5 on each arm. So then,
Right now, we've got 7 on
seven
the
on
existing 2, and we're going to add one more and move two from the others over, and then change out 2.
so in order for you to max out to 21, do you need another arm installation there, or
We
or 3?
would add
supplies?
the other antennas on the existing arm, but we have to come back here to add more antennas.
So you're not going to be adding any more
No.
arms? Okay.
And the need for that essentially is the antennas have a 120-degree radiation pattern, so we've got 120 here, 40, and 360. That's it. 0, 120, and 240. That's it. Short of it.
Any other questions? All right, not at this time, sir.
Thank you.
Mr.
Something just
Baxter?
occurred to me, I apologize, and when you take off the 2 antennas, one from each of the other arms, and move it to the new arm, you're not going to just infill those without coming back and talking to us, are you?
No,
Okay.
because the number's still the same.
Okay, 15 would be
Yeah,
the max.
15.
Okay, all right, sir.
And is that as one of the conditions?
No, sir. Well, the condition, yes, I'm going to actually say yes, and we'll go through that with you. I'll take that back. I will say yes.
Now is a good time to continue. We've heard from the speaker. We'll look for your concluding remarks and
Okay.
start deliberations shortly.
All right, sir. In response to your question, if we look at planning department requirements, these sort of boilerplate type conditions that we place on these projects, if you look at number 1, the subject property shall be developed, maintained, and operated in substantial accord with the plans and materials submitted, as well as with the conditions of this grant, any law, statute, ordinance, other regulation applicable to any development or activity of the subject property. And then the next one jumps to prior to issuance of building permits, plans shall be reviewed and approved by the planning department to ensure compliance with the plans and materials approved by the planning commission, etc. Number 3, any modification to these plans must be approved by the Planning Commission, by the Planning Department staff prior to changes on working drawings or in the field. Changes considered substantial by planning staff must be returned for review by the Planning Commission.
So you're saying it's inferred
Oh, they're pretty
by
much.
those statements?
Yeah, these statements actually state he cannot change anything. First, he can't change anything arbitrarily all by themselves without coming to staff. Number 3, any modifications here, the last sentence of that number 3 says, the determination of whether or not a change is substantial shall be made by the Director of Planning. Now, if we have stated at this time that only 15 antennae are going to be allowed, then the first 2 conditions will be really tough for staff to come in and arbitrarily change that, because we've limited to the public notice what we have out there.
Yeah, it's not a condition, it's a requirement.
It's a requirement. Yeah, well, the condition is a requirement. That's correct. And so all 3 of them kind of all tie in. Number 1, you got to build it according to what you said you were going to do. Number 2, you got to come to plan check and we verify that. And number 3, if you want to modify it, you got to come and talk to us first. Not only that, though, they also have to go to Parks and Recreation for some of this implementation too, which will be part of their lease, and that also ties them up. Now you'll say, okay, well, what about Parks and Recreation? We'll go to condition number 5. Condition number 5, Verizon Wireless shall comply with the terms of their lease with the city as amended to the satisfaction of Director of Parks, Recreation, and Community Service. So we are also tying them there to another agency that has review of these types of things.
Okay.
And we sort of work in tandem anyway with Parks. So that would be my response, sir.
Questions for staff? Mr. Sheets?
Mayor, I might have to speak to Chris. We didn't talk about the dish. Can you tell me if that is part of the wireless activity?
Yes, it's part of the...
I'm sorry.
You need to come up. I apologize for that. That was
That's all right.
Yes, it's part of the existing, we call our backhaul for the site, so it's in part of the original installation.
Okay. All right, I'm good.
Any other questions for staff? Seeing none, I'm going to close the public hearing. We'll enter into deliberations. Who would like to go first?
I'll go ahead and go.
Please.
I have no problem with the site. I know it's there. I remember when it went in, and it seems to follow all the requirements. My problem is due to the fact that there's a lot of activity and legislation preparation going on relative to cell sites, and one of the primary factors is the size of the cells, the antennas. It seems to me that they've kind of fallen into the spot where they're discussing what to do with that. And I don't know if we can either place a condition that you'd have to adjust to that, or if we might have to wait. My point is, it looks like the activity around this legislation is on a fast track, and it will be my recommendation, based on one of the meetings that I went to for public input, one of the specific points was the size of the antennas and their placement. In this case, that's changing. So based on that, I would recommend that we wait until the legislation is done, unless we could come up with something, a condition that might state that whatever the changes are, you could adjust to them, and in my estimation, that would mean you'd have to wait anyway. So that would be my take on this issue right now.
All right. Who else would like to go now?
I kind of have a question on that. I mean, if the new legislation comes in, it takes, goes in effect, doesn't the old installation grandfather clause so that, you don't really have to do anything? So
One would think.
yeah, one would think.
I understand that, and if this was already in, I would agree with that. But my point is, there's a lot of concern in the community about what we put in and where we put it in.
If I may, I don't know anything about this new legislation. I do know that, I don't know what your definition of antenna size is. The size of an element is fixed by the frequency, which is, that's how big a quarter wavelength or whatever it is. That's physics. The number of antennas you have are predicated on the antenna pattern, which is 120 degrees in the case of these, or the design of these arrays. So if you want 360 coverage, you got to have 4 sites. And then the number of antennas you have on each would be how many channels you need to accommodate, and if you can't accommodate the customer base on that, in that area with some limited number of antennas, then you just have to put up another pole somewhere else down the street. And so I'm not really sure what this new legislation is about. I'm not sure it would do anything to improve or eliminate any concerns anyone might have about adding another couple of antennas to this pole. So in my estimation, even though I'm curious and interested about this legislation, which I hadn't heard about, I kind of feel at the moment that it's crystal ball time if you want to go that way, and inclined to go that way, so I tend to dismiss any or discount any pending legislation and would approve this.
Mr. Lee?
Yeah, it seems like the approval was given to expand the antenna to 21 and is within the guideline or the envelope, so I don't have any problems with that.
Okay. Well, in Highland, whatever street it was, where one of the companies was going to place something in a
residential neighborhood that many people could perceive as being insensitive to the neighborhood, aesthetically, location, so on. This is an existing site, but it's also in a good location as it relates to it. It's not. There is a residential neighborhood across the wash, but it's some distance away. Using special recreation areas for telecommunication towers is, in general, a good idea because you're keeping it out of residential neighborhoods. It allows for a certain height that, as Mr. Torgerson pointed out, and I appreciate your wisdom on the antennas, the heights, and the wavelengths, and that type of thing. It will, again, probably reduce, or I would argue that it would reduce, the need to try to do something down the street. And if nothing else, it gives us a good reason to argue that you've got this facility, you don't need to go down the street. So to that end, I'm also inclined to, since it's an existing facility, since it seems from my perspective to be in a good location, to provide the service that they seem to be allowed by federal law, I'm inclined to grant it. If we want to impose conditions that are, even though Mr. Baxter has said it's pretty clear, I wonder if we want to impose conditions that actually, whether or not we want to incorporate some numerological limitations, like 15 antennas, period. The size can increase, things like that, whether we want to do that to just maybe put a little control in before this thing becomes overblown. I don't know if that's reasonable or not.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I would think that would be somewhat unnecessary, because if you go from 15 to 21, unless I've forgotten my arithmetic, which is quite likely as long ago as it's been, but that's only 2 more of these little antenna things per arm, and it would hardly be noticeable.
Okay.
As far as a visual impact, to go to the max of 21, that's 6 more antennas on 3 arms. That's 2 per arm. Without my calculator.
Take your shoes off.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm not convinced that would be necessary.
All right. Well, that's why I raised the idea.
May I just ask a question?
Mhm.
Based on what you're saying, when we look at that condition number 3, any modifications of these plans must be approved by the planning staff. the determination of whether or not a change is substantial, does that mean that if the applicant came in and said, I want to fill in the gap on those two existing, 7 and 7, and then add the remainder to the new arm, is that outside your thoughts, or does that not seem to be a problem? In other words, if you were to say to the staff, a modification would allow 7 panel antennas to each armature, is that something
Okay,
acceptable?
So the addition of antenna elements does two things. I'm just going to try to logically step through this the way I'm thinking out loud here.
Yes, sir.
Number one thing may be that there's an economic value associated with those extra channels and extra subscribers that can be accommodated by the addition of 7 more antennas. That is something that would require a renegotiation of the lease, and that's between the Parks and Recreation and Verizon and all the purview of this group. And then the other thing is, of course, what other objectionable elements, or what could possibly be the objection to an additional few elements like that? Well, it would be an aesthetic matter, and it gets down to kind of a judgment call on the part of the planning department on whether or not that's a substantial increase, or what you're wording the...
And number 3, sir, on the planning department, the last
Yeah,
sentence.
determination of whether or not a change is substantial shall be made by director of planning.
And that was one of the
I
things.
wouldn't have any problem with letting the director of planning
The number
worry about that downstream.
The number 21 is in the lease agreement with Parks and Rec. I don't believe it's in anything that planning did originally, is it? I glanced, I didn't see where anything from planning said anything about 21. I believe that's the Park and Rec lease agreement, right?
Well, I haven't shown you anything from Parks and Recreation that says it's 21. They only have 2 existing arms right now. Each arm is allowed up to 7 panel antennas for a total of 14.
So it's the practical,
They're
adding
limited.
the arm is where it comes up to the 21.
That is correct, sir, right at this point. And we're not referring to the dish antennas. I did go back and I found a discussion that they discussed the 3 dish antennas, but there's only one, but that's not part of this conversation. So now that we add a new arm,
That's where
there's
they get
7 possible slots that can open up. And they're proposing to fill 3 of them, 1 from each arm on it, and 1 new one, that would be 3. That would leave a possible 4 openings on that new arm, and 1 opening on each of the other arms. Now, if that's something that would make it simpler for the applicant, cost-wise, things of that nature, if the commissioner said adding those is not an issue, then that would be something you would have to...
I think like what Chairman Kane said, actually having that extra arm and having that extra spot, actually prevents another pole going up. So, if you got an existing pole there, and we're going to approve this arm, then, the size of the antennas, I don't think really is that, I guess, large. Go ahead.
No.
Large enough where it becomes an eyesore or anything like that. So I tend to I thought that 21 was some number that we already approved. That's why I made that comment. But I'm kind of agreeable to setting that.
I think our basic question is, does adding that arm suddenly create a safety, health, any sort of issue, given the location and everything else? And I guess I'm convinced that adding that 3rd arm is fine, to put it succinctly. Any other comments from commissioners? Other thoughts? Mr. Sheets?
Yeah, just a point of clarification. I'm by no means an expert on this type of technology, but based on the input that I did receive going to one of the public hearings, those technology changes daily. Granted, it's a setup and an array of antennas that went in a dozen years ago or whatever, but if we look on Fern Lane, we have 4 or 5 different sites up there, and none of them look like this. if we go where the 134 freeway and the 2 freeway cross, the intersection there are 3 monopoles there, and not that I like them, but none of them look like this array. And specifically stated in fact, the legal staff's, the items the legal staff are working on was the actual size and space which the antennas will take up. And I truly don't believe that's going to impact this site. There's only one way they can go. I have nothing against this site. I think it's very appropriate. My concern is giving a false impression, not maybe to you, this particular item, but future ones, that to grow these antenna arrays beyond a certain size is going to be okay. So those are my thoughts and my concerns. I've seen and heard information. The information we were presented at the one meeting was from an expert in RF design and cell design, and they had legal interpretations, had a legal expert on this particular type of design, cell site design. So, and Mr. Torgerson even said he doesn't know what that's about, the legislation, and that's true. That's kind of where I'm coming from. That's really what I was saying, with just some added comments about what I heard. So that's just a point of clarification for what I was thinking about relative to this issue. So that's all I have.
Okay. Again, a specific site, a specific project. I think it's very clear that we're certainly not going to intend as a commission to create some sort of mandate for cell providers to suddenly start increasing or intensifying their tower's use. If they think that they are, they're going to become very surprised the next time they approach at least me on this commission. Would someone like to make a motion?
Yeah, Mr. Chair. I'll make a motion. I would move that upon consideration of the Special Recreation Development Review Plan PSR 2009-002, and after having reviewed and considered all materials and exhibits submitted with regard to said proposal to expand and alter an existing unmanned wireless telecommunication facility on a city-owned lot, address is 1714 Kenyatta Boulevard, located within the Special Recreation Zone, subject to compliance with Title 30 of the Glendale Municipal Code, and following 6 conditions listed below. And the Planning Commission hereby makes each and all of the following findings of fact, which I will not read, but they're in the motion. There are 3 findings of fact and 6 requirements.
Second. I have a motion and support. Call roll, please.
Commissioner Sheets?
No.
Commissioner Torgerson?
Aye.
Commissioner Lee?
Aye.
Chair Kane?
Aye, and a vote of 3-1. The Special Recreation Zone Development Plan Review Case Number PSR 2009-002 has been approved with the stated conditions and findings.
Thank you.
All right. We'll move backwards on the agenda, but forward in our meeting to new business use variance case PVAR 2009-013. Its location is 809 East Lomita Avenue. It's APN 5674-029-010. It's a use variance to establish and operate a daycare center and an existing single-family residence located in the R2250 medium-density residential zone, where the use is prohibited when not located in a church, synagogue, temple, or any other house of worship through an approved conditional use permit. This is not an appeal, so I don't need to worry about that. All right. The recommendation is that the Planning Commission deny the request to establish and operate a daycare center. Who's representing us for staff? Very good. Staff overview, please.
Chairman Kane, members of the Commission, this is the site plan of the proposed daycare. Right now, there's a single-family home in the area. It's owner-occupied. As the staff report says, it's actually a large family daycare, up to 14 people. That's what's allowed under the state. So we don't regulate daycare in single-family homes up to 14. Anything over 14, we consider it a daycare center. What the applicant is proposing to do is create a daycare center up to 40 people. Normally, we would consider that a commercial use, and the reason it's prohibited is because this is in a residential neighborhood, so essentially you're changing a residential use into a commercial use in a residential neighborhood. That's kind of the reason why there isn't a CUP. There's no conditional use permit because it's prohibited. If this was a church or a synagogue or a place that really is built for assembly uses where there's adequate parking, that's why it would be a CUP or allowable use in that zone. So just to explain right now, you have the house that's in the front of the lot, and then to the rear is where there's a parking area. It's actually a garage right now. The applicant showing this is a 3-car garage in his proposal. If you look at the photos of the site, I don't know if you've had a chance to go out there, but it's actually a 2-car garage. And the picture kind of says it all. I'm going to show it to you. You can sort of see in this photo here. So there's essentially a garage portion for 2 cars, and then part of it that's actually being used as occupied area. So under the proposal, the area in the back that's now used as an area for kids to play. According to their site plan, they're showing, I guess, adding another door to the garage and then taking out the play area that's currently there. So if you want to pass the pictures around. I think the pictures are very useful in this case. Because right now, this is where the kids play. And you'll see there is a small grass area. The only access to this area comes through this driveway. And under the proposal, although it's not shown on the site plan at all, but the description that was provided by the applicant shows that the driveway would be used for not only access to the parking area, it's also accessed for clients who would drop off their kids. Instead of being 14, it would go up to 40 kids. When we took a look at the site plan, we just had some general observations. First of all, it's a rectangular lot. As you can see here, it's in the middle of a residential area. Surrounding uses are residential. There's even a single family next door. But there's multifamily surrounding, so clearly this street, Lomita, is residential. It has residential traffic impacts, as noted in the staff report. We get comments from our traffic engineers. They noted that there are traffic impacts. They are concerned with the drop-off and pickup times. Just because Lomita is a local street, and you'd have a lot of extra traffic. Going from 14 to 40 would be a substantial change. Again, we can't control 14. That's something we're precluded from doing by the state. However, again, increasing this to 40, that's why this is before you. Right now, it is, like I said, the lot's flat. It's rectangular. There's nothing unique about the site. It is used as a single-family home. That is consistent with not only the zoning, but also uses in the area. And the use as proposed, if there's going to be a daycare center, would require 5 parking spaces. The applicant is showing 5 parking spaces. You would have 3 parking spaces in the garage, another parking space outside, and then a handicap parking space that would be next to the building. However, when we look at the site plan a little more closely, we realize, well, they're not showing the parking garage, they're not showing backing distance, although they show it here. One of the concerns we have is where we see where this handicap ramp is. This is a required slope to get up to the house. They're showing their handicap parking here on the plan, but they're not showing it here. And they're actually showing it in front of this landing area, which would be required for access, but here they're showing a slope. So when we figure where the slope would be, where the turning radius is for the garage, we feel that this site will probably not work at all for handicap. In fact, putting the handicap ramp in here might preclude use of some of this garage, so we have serious concerns whether this would actually meet handicap requirements for access to the site and parking if it were converted from a residential use into a daycare center. We also had some questions when we look at the site photos. It's showing there's a walking area in here. It doesn't show as being all landscaped. There's a little bit of a landscape planter shown in here. It's not shown on the proposed change. And then when we notice what the minimum landscaping is. They're showing that the landscaping would be 26% in a multifamily zone, maximum is 25%. Are they really not going to have an access point that's going to be an area for kids to evacuate if they needed to get out of the back? There is a gate here. So we just have some concerns. It looks like there's some things that they haven't worked out. They may be short of landscaping if they actually convert this to a proposed daycare. I mean, right now, we don't think there's a problem. There's a nice big grassy play area, but again, on their site plan, they're showing that being removed. So we do have some concerns with just how this site is going to function, especially when you have a daycare for 40 kids and no play area is shown on the site plan. So perhaps the applicant can explain, is this really going to be a parking area? Is it going to be a play area? Or is it going to be a parking area and a play area? Which, again, we have more concerns with that. There's also a gate shown on the site, on the photos. And there is one shown, we believe this is a gate, but it's not delineated what this is, if this is coming in or out, it's unclear. I believe we would want to separate the kids from the cars, and I believe the applicant would want to do that. It's not clear how that would occur here. And then also, again, we have concerns with the drop-off and pickup. If you have 40 kids coming in and out at the same time, where are parents supposed to drive back here and drop off kids or not? It's just not clear. It hasn't been clearly stated in the application. And again, we're concerned with the impacts that this commercial use is going to have on a residential neighborhood. Not that we're against childcare, because clearly childcare is permitted in all the commercial zones. We have C2 and C3 zones in the vicinity, not right on the street, but we do have daycare zoning, or zoning available for daycare in the area. As well as we do allow daycare in residential, multifamily residential zones, but only when they're in conjunction with other assembly uses such as churches or synagogues or temples. So that's another concern that we have with this site plan and with this proposal. So based on what I've pointed out here, staff feels that the application submitted by the applicant has not demonstrated a needs for the findings for a use variance. There is no practical difficulty since the site is currently used as a single-family residence, which would be in accordance with the code. It's also used as a daycare facility. That's also in accordance with state law. It's permissible under the zone. The problem is the expansion into a change of use, as it says here, into a center, which under our code is commercial. There are other commercial zones throughout the city which could have the allowed use available, just not right here. So we feel like it's not the daycare that's the issue, but it's the change from residential use and also the expansion. Under B, for findings, there is no exceptional circumstances or condition applicable to the property involved that do not generally apply to other property in the same zone or neighborhood. Because this is a flat, rectangularly shaped lot in the middle of a residential zone, and it's currently used as a residential neighborhood in accordance with the zone. Any change would be a hardship that's self-imposed. The granting of the variance may be detrimental to the public welfare or injurious to the property improvements in the neighborhood because this property will cause traffic and parking impacts. We are concerned with the circulation into the parking to the rear of the lot. We feel it is inadequate to handle the pickup and drop-off of children as designed, also for employee parking if the employee parking would cross a play area. Kids will not have an outdoor playground as is shown on this map, or as shown on the site plan. That concerns us. Also, the on-site parking will not be adequate for employees and the handicapped as shown on their site plan. We have concerns with even the handicap access, whether it would meet the building code. And D, we feel that this project is contrary to the objectives of the zoning code because the project does not appear to meet minimum landscaping requirements of 25%, nor do they meet the required parking requirements as shown on the site plan. And furthermore, we have concerns that even if with the length of the ramp that you would need for the handicap access, no matter where they put the ramp, it'll interfere with where they're showing handicap parking or with driveways or an access. And we are concerned that the existing three-car garage that's shown on the plan as a three-car garage really is not. Again, we're concerned that that handicap space is shown and the handicap ramp is shown may interfere with the turning radius for entrance to the garage, which would make the garage inadequate for meeting parking requirements. That concludes staff's presentation. So I'm
Mr. Lee?
sorry I'm filling in for the case planner, so.
I have a question. Obviously, it takes away all the playground area. If I remember correctly, community care licensing, which is a state agency, is the one who issues licensing for this daycare centers, also requires for daycare center to have a playground for the kids. I think it's a requirement.
I believe they do.
Yeah, it's not an option. So then if you take
X
the
number of feet per kid,
Right.
based on whether
Right.
they're infant or toddler.
But it sounds like you are taking that away. So I mean, there you cannot, you're short of that requirement. Yeah.
And that
Fall
is
short of
exactly our concern.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're showing this as a parking in back of
Right.
area, where are the kids going to play?
Right,
That is
exactly.
precisely the concern we have.
Right.
I mean, as you see on the photos that we passed out, there definitely is a play area now for 14, and as the applicant has pointed out in their application, we've not received complaints for the existing use. And again, we can't stop the existing use as it is, because it is allowed under the state law. It is a single-family home. It is owner-occupied, and they can have a large family daycare in their residence up to 14.
Any other questions for staff at this time?
Just
Mr.
on that
Sheets?
point, I've known of other situations where that occurs as far as 14, and we have no control over that, but they do have requirements that they have to meet for the state.
Yes.
Who validates that? Do we play any role as far as whether they do meet those standards in our city?
We defer to the health and safety code, so we don't have other standards that I'm aware of, unless, Wolf, if you're aware of something. I'm not aware of anything that we let the state handle that for their requirements.
Yeah, Commissioners, in terms of zoning, the state requires us to treat that like a regular single-family dwelling unit.
I mean, there are licensing requirements I know
Right.
that they have to comply with, so we let that dictate how the...
My recollection in previous cases that I've been involved with, there was a state requirement exactly on number of square feet of outdoor playground area per child. So again, as Laura said, where's that going to be?
Yeah, we know they used to have on some of the daycare that we used to see, we used to know that sometimes they would have like a valet that would come out and meet the kids, but we know that the state laws changed such that when you have a daycare, they require parents to actually sign their children in. You have to sign them in and sign them out. You can't just, open your door and say, run in, like people used to do. So I know that has created parking impacts for many of the existing daycares that we have in the city.
Yeah, that's the only one.
Nothing more at this time. All right. All right, the applicant can do their presentation. And as you introduce yourself, would you also clarify your role as it relates to the applicant and property owner?
My name is Ara Vartanian. Address is 109 East Harvard, number 301, located in Glendale, California. I'm representing the applicant as a consultant for the project. I want to begin my presentation by providing a brief overview of the project, maybe some stuff that staff missed out on. As planning staff mentioned, this project is for a variance to allow the operation of a 40-child daycare center, ages 2 to 5 in an R20 250 medium-density multifamily residential zone. The 40-child maximum that we're saying, based on the occupancy load, they're allowed up to 52, is 35 net of the square footage, but the maximum children that is allowed is based on the state. So the state's the one that comes out and they do the actual measurement minus the bathrooms, and whatever's actually children can occupy, that's what they go off of. So the 40-child daycare is just the maximum that we're asking for, but in the end it is going to be dictated by the state. The present use is an existing, recently upgraded in 2006 single-family dwelling, which is being used as a 14-child maximum family care center, and this business has been operating for the past 10 years, and the expansion is actually demanded by the community and neighborhood. At this time, I'd like to present you a copy of their state license showing that they've been operating since August 4 of 1998.
Thank you. Do you have another copy? This is a copy, right? Because we'll have to keep it now for
Yeah, that's
record.
your copy. I'd like to discuss my findings now, if that's okay with the commission. Finding 1 asks, how will the strict application of the provisions of any such ordinance noted above result in practical difficulties or unnecessary hardships inconsistent with the general purpose and intent of the ordinance? The current family care center has recently experienced a great demand to accept more children. Unfortunately, due to daycare centers not being allowed in the R2250 zone, the owner hasn't had the means to expand. Daycare centers are used by parents to safely leave their children in the hands of a professional before they have to go to work. The proposed daycare center is located in an area that provides an experienced and safe daycare facility for families close to their homes without the large burden of finding transportation for their children. Without this daycare center, local area residents will need to look outside of the area for these services. The intent of the ordinance is to expand opportunities for the provisions of needed social services. Strict application of the ordinance will prevent the expansion of the much-needed daycare center for this specific area. Finding 2 states, what exceptional circumstances or conditions apply to the property involved or to the intended use or development of the property that do not apply generally to other properties in the same zone or neighborhood. Some of the exceptional circumstances applicable to the property involved or to the intended use that do not apply to other zones are that it's an existing family care center and it's been around for over 10 years. So the community has grown accustomed to taking their children there for professional care and education. Due to the increase in the population and residential development, the demand for children has also increased. Unfortunately, the convenient location of the proposed daycare center is a restricted zone. Finding C, why will granting of the variance not be detrimental to public welfare? Granting of the use variance will not be detrimental to public welfare because all required necessities are met and overachieved. The existing single-family dwelling was recently expanded and upgraded in 2006 via a building combination permit starting with 2006. I don't know the last 4 digits. Parking is provided for the operators in the rear by means of a detached proposed 3-car garage and 2 outdoor parking spots, 1 being handicap van accessible. During the recent renovation, a complete fire sprinkler and fire alarm system was installed per request of the fire department. The fire department's only requests for this project were the fire sprinklers and alarms, which both were met and the permits finalized. The building and safety's main concern was handicap accessibility, which is provided in the rear by means of a handicap-approved ramp. As staff mentioned, if times comes in construction and the backup space of the parking is not met because of that ramp, we also have the second option of putting that ramp in the front of the house because it's only 3 stairs in the front of the house, so we can always put the ramp in front of the house to meet the building and safety's handicap accessibility requirements. As for traffic circulation, this is controlled by differentiating drop-offs and pickups at different times, so not a lot of vehicles are congested in the driveway at any given time. The wide and long driveway on the side of the house provides a loading and unloading zone for children, where a turnaround is provided in the end. Traffic circulation measures have always been smooth and trouble-free. In fact, neither the neighbors nor the city have ever had problems with traffic, noise, or any other forms of discomfort. The different age groups I'm talking about are ages 2 to 3, 3 to 4, and 4 to 5. I'll get that into more details as it was in the environmental review, which is going to be later in my presentation. My last finding is why will granting of the variance be in keeping with the objectives of the ordinance? Granting of the variance will not be contrary to the objectives of the ordinance. The intent of the ordinance is to expand opportunities for the provisions of needed daycare services. The variance will also result in a decrease in hardships for local area residents, actually. Expansion of the existing family care center into a daycare center for local residents will be corresponding to the ordinance. I would like to draw your attention to the 3 points in the environmental review that when I went over, I believe stood out in support of this project. Number 1, on page 17, under the land use and planning section, it asks if the project will cause conflict with any applicable land use plan, policy, or regulation of an agency with jurisdiction over the project. The 3-paragraph explanation is concluded by saying, I quote, "The adjoining properties and surrounding neighborhood have grown accustomed to a family daycare center located at the property since it has been in continuous operation for many years. The applicant has demonstrated to be a responsible and good neighbor as no complaints have been recorded with the city concerning the family daycare center. The proposed increase in use would not result in a significant impact. End of quote. My second point is on page 19 of the environmental review under the noise section. It asks if exposure of persons to or generation of noise levels in the excess of standards established in the local general plan or noise ordinance or other agencies. The explanation is summarized by saying the majority of the time the children will be indoors, so therefore noise will not be that much. However, periodic noise impacts could occur when the children are playing outdoors. For this, a mitigation measure is provided, which we will be more than glad to adopt as a condition of approval. The mitigation measure states that the hours of operation shall be restricted to 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday. No daycare service shall be provided on Saturdays or Sundays. Activities at the daycare center shall be programmed so that no two age groups use the outdoor play area at the same time. And Part C, no one age group shall use the outdoor play area for more than 45 minutes. We're more than happy to adopt, as I said, this mitigation measure as a condition of approval. And all these conditions will be the responsibility of the Neighborhood Services Administrator to monitor and make sure it's being followed. My third and final point of the environmental review is under the transportation and traffic section. It asks if the project will cause an increase
Page, please. I'm sorry, I thought you had it in front of you. I didn't mean to.
Page 24, I'm sorry.
Thank you very much.
Sure. Under the traffic and transportation and traffic section. It asks if the project will cause an increase in traffic, which is substantial in relation to the existing traffic load and capacity of the street system. After we mentioned our proposed drop-off plan of the 3 different age groups, dropped off and picked up at different times with 15-minute intervals for each age group, a less than significant impact was recorded. The study mentioned that the proposed project includes the required drop-off space consistent with the zoning code at the rear of the property. Also, I quote, Lomita Avenue in the project area has lane widths greater than the guidelines and the circulation elements suggest and parking on both sides of the street. The Traffic and Transportation Division characterized on-street parking demand as significant, but during the proposed drop-off time, several available on-street parking spaces were observed in front of the site as well as within the immediate vicinity. Given the proposed drop-off and pickup schedule, staff observations of available on-street parking, and the fact that the daycare center currently provides service to families who reside within the neighborhood, impacts of traffic are anticipated to be less than significant. End of quote. During this time of my presentation, I would like to provide the Planning Commission with 2 different letters. One of these letters is from the supporting parents of the daycare, showing their signature of supportal. And the second letter is from the property owners of the immediate vicinity of 809 East Lomita, also showing their support.
Thank you.
With those letters, I conclude my presentation. I'm open to any questions.
I have a couple questions.
Mr. Lee.
I have 2 questions for you. First one is, this type of a facility is permitted under commercial zone, and did you or did your client make an effort to look for a facility or space that could accommodate this type of service?
I believe my client did look for commercial use, but unfortunately, due to the 10 years in business and that people have grown accustomed to this area, and due to, unfortunately, the economic stance of the people right now, it was impossible for them. And when they sat down and talked with the neighborhood and the community, which is the people that are going to be most affected by this project, they agreed by their support that they don't want them to move. They want them to expand, actually. So they thought about it. They discussed with the neighborhood and the community, and their conclusion was that they wanted to stay and expand here to meet the demands of the neighborhood.
Well, normally, if the service is great and, if their name has been known, they've been in business for 10 years, and if they do move, I'm pretty sure that they'll have followers. wherever they move to. But anyways, that's not.
Another problem is that since it's a medium-density multifamily residential zone, most of the parents don't have means of transportation besides the bus system. So the convenience is that they could just, since it's pretty densified in that area, a lot of people live there, it's convenient for them to just go walk their kids to the daycare, drop them off, and catch the means of public transportation for their job.
The second part of the question is the same thing that I asked the staff here, and that is, the playground area, which is really required by the community care licensing people, the state people. According to your plan, that's gone. That's taken away by the parking spaces and the cars driving into the garages. So, where are you proposing to have the playground?
At this point, as a consultant, I'm not sure, but I know that the playground is dictated by the state, and they're not going to even be able to open without them meeting the state minimum requirements of the playground. So the playground is going to be met by one way or another. But
how? I don't see it on your plan.
I don't know, honestly. The operator will know better.
Other questions for the speaker? Mr. Sheets?
I just had a quick question. I noticed you have an adjoining driveway with the property, I think that would be to the west, 807 and 805. There's a gate that exists in the wall that borders your driveway, the driveway of this property. Are those properties associated with this center at all as far as the usage of the kids, or is it you just happen to have a gate in there?
It just happens to have a gate in there. Are you talking about the property to the left or to the right?
Left.
To the left?
If you go down that driveway about halfway back, and that wall is about a 6-foot wall,
Yes,
and it's in the pictures that were provided. It's a pretty substantial gate that's there. I just didn't know if that was part of the use, or just...
It has nothing to do with the use. Two different lots. It's a 6-foot high CMU wall. There's actually a gate in the front. As staff wasn't clear about it, that gate is locked during business hours, so children can't just wander off to the front.
Sure. I don't have any other questions.
Under the current operation, you don't have some of the constraints that you're proposing, notably the hours of 8 to 5?
Correct.
Are you telling me that right now, those 14 kids or so that are using the daycare center, none of their parents drop them off before 8 o'clock in the morning?
Those are the hours of operations that they operate, 8 to 5. And the numerous times that I have been there past 5, it's all the children have left, and maybe 1 or 2 children.
That means the parents obviously have jobs that start like at 8:30 or 9 o'clock. I'm just surprised by that. As an 8 to 5 kind of guy myself. So right now, their current hours of operation are 8 to 5?
Their current hours, I don't believe, are 8 to 5. The 8 to 5 was recommended.
I understand. What are their current hours?
Can I ask?
Oh, please.
Eight to 5. They start bringing their children at 8. And
Surprising. All right. I don't think I have anything else myself. Any other questions for the speaker right now? All right. You'll actually have for lack of a better phrase, a rebuttal period shortly.
Thank you.
All right. I have 2 speaker cards. Sonia Shortian. That continues a long history I have of mispronouncing names.
Good evening, everyone. So my name is Sonia Shtoyan. My address is 331 West Tucker Street, Apartment 4, Glendale, California, 91202. I'm here because I wanted to value the job that I know pretty long time. They started operating this. I don't consider daycare business because it's something different. They started 1998, and I joined the team in 1999. And my point of view is coming as a parent, my point of view is coming as a teacher, a kind of loving psychology, and the other point of view is coming as a U.S. citizen. And why I'm here, because I know nowadays we need so much the love, the caring people, and I appreciate their job because they are professional. And so I worked, and as a parent and as a teacher, because so I was so happy being there for probably close to 3 years, and they are doing great job. And every time, it's not only like operating the job, the daycare as a safe environment, they are giving the love, they are giving the knowledge, because we know that how important is the future generation for America, and the safe environment, the loving, the food and everything, all this combination is making this daycare very valuable. And I'll be very happy to see this daycare to open widely their doors and accept more children, because I know a lot of daycares. I'm working as a gain service worker right now, but I know how important this kind of daycares, because we need to see America in a good hands, right? And this daycare is the right place for the future generation, because they give love, they share their knowledge, their professionalism, and I'm so happy to be here and just support this daycare.
All right.
That's my point of view.
Thank you. Questions for the speaker? I have a couple. Were your kids, did your kids use this daycare then?
Yes. My kid, I have one kid, so in 1999, so she attended 3 years. That's why my point of view is coming as a parent.
Not current, but past.
Yes.
And did you work there
Yeah,
at
we
that
worked.
time or currently?
No, that time, that period of time in 1999.
Win-win, okay.
1999, like close to 2001.
And so you're employed somewhere else right now?
Yeah.
And just to carry through the theme, what are your hours at your current job?
Right now, I'm working from 7:30 to 4 o'clock.
Okay, so you could have, in terms of an 8 to 5, it would have been great for pickup, but you would have had a problem with their hours of operation under your current job, right?
I think so, but right now, because my daughter is attending high school already,
I know,
I
it's
understand
history
your
for you.
point. Yeah.
I'm just pointing out, and of course, there are ways to work that out, grandparents or whatever, but,
Yeah.
okay.
But my point of view, let me mention, because if I know that what kind of daycare is that, so I would change the work hours, because that is very important for me, okay? Just to...
I understand.
Yeah.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And the only other speaker card I have is Gohar. I'm sorry, the letters run together. Oh, that I could have done.
That one. That one's for me.
I wish it, I'm going to blame your handwriting.
Hi, my name is Gohar Manukin. I live at 921 South Chevy Chase Drive, number 4, Glendale, California, 91205. I'm just here to present that it's an amazing daycare, first I have to say, because I volunteered there probably about maybe 3 years or so. Just amazing, very educational, very into discipline, which it's very important in the Armenian culture, and I'm sure any other culture. Very loving. I love all the kids. I mean, it's amazing when you just go there and they run to you, so it's really great. And I just think that they really should expand, because, like she said, this community, America needs love for kids, and they have great education. It's not just a business type of place. It's where you take your kids, you know them, they hug you. I know, I support it 100%. I think the kids need it. I think they need to expand the daycare. So that's all I have to say.
All right. Questions from the commissioners? Do you have children yourself?
No, I do not.
All right. No other questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Before rebuttal, any other comments from staff?
Well, just in terms of traffic impacts, when it says less than significant, it doesn't mean that there is not an impact. It just means less than significant in terms of CEQA. Otherwise, we would be requiring an environmental impact report. And so I just wanted to clarify that doesn't mean that there may not be a problem. It's just the degree of the problem. Thanks.
All right. All right, the applicant has a period of time for rebuttal. I'll allow any additional comments for that matter. Strictly speaking, it should be rebuttal, but there's not really much to rebut over the last few minutes.
One thing I forgot to mention that I want to clarify is the three-car garage. When I first submitted this project with Radar, I did tell him that it's an existing two-car garage with a room to expand to the three-car garage. He told me on the plans just show a proposed three-car garage. So if the project does get approved, then the proposal means that during construction I have to provide that. So that's the reason for they thought it was inconsistent, but that's what the way I was recommended to go by Radar Duan, who was the case planner. One more thing I was looking for.
That's how we understood it also.
Yeah.
So.
In the staff report, it says comments received from other city departments. I just want to clarify and let people know that it says that generally most city departments do not have a major concern or comment regarding the proposed use, with the exception of the routine requirements specific to the change in occupancy. However, the Traffic and Transportation Administrator has expressed that on-street parking demand in the vicinity of the project site is significant, which I believe was clarified in the environmental. So I just want to, based on the staff report, that no other city department has any major concerns or comments. That's it for me. I'm open.
All right. Any other questions at this time? All right. Seeing none, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
We'll close the public hearing and enter into deliberations. Who would like to go first?
I'll go.
All right, Mr. Lee.
I have no doubt that the existing daycare center is a stellar one, and it's been really doing the right, service to the community, providing loving care, as a lot of the neighbors stated, and as speakers here stated. However, I truly believe that expanding to accommodate 40 kids really cannot. There's a zoning requirement, and all these are set so that we can control the growth of the city and the need of this, the residents and so on. I just cannot find from your proposals and the statements made by the speakers to support the conversion or expansion of this daycare center to 40 kids. So I am going to go against it.
All right. Mr. Torgerson, are you prepared?
I will go next.
I only say that because I see Mr. Sheets is
He's
writing.
busily writing. This is obviously a very well-run daycare center, the way, looking at the pictures and hearing what people have had to say about it. Their heart's in the right place. It's a, if I lived in the neighborhood and I had a young child that needed daycare, I wouldn't hesitate to run them down the street and make use of this particular facility. That being said, I too have a difficult time with the 200% increase in the number of kids. That triggers, having that many kids then triggers this parking requirement, which then triggers the loss of the playground area and raises a lot of concerns about traffic and parking. I just wouldn't be able to find all four of the findings, I don't believe, because we do need daycare. We do need, as a city, to figure out how to provide daycare and how to provide it in areas close to the neighborhoods. But unfortunately, I just don't believe this is a really good location. If they'd come in with a proposal for maybe 20, something like that, 20 or a small increase in the number of kids, you could kind of argue your way through and rationalize that, well, maybe that won't cause a parking problem, and maybe they won't need that many spaces, and maybe they can still provide adequate playground. And the playground areas could probably be slightly different for the different age groups. Maybe that could have been accommodated, but 40 just feels too many to me, so I would not be able to support making all the findings.
Mr. Sheets?
Okay, I feel the same way. There's no doubt in listening to the comments that have been made this evening that this is a great center, and just by looking at the site, having been out there and observing the pictures, it's a site that is well managed, well maintained, and obviously does a good job. So my primary thought is it's not allowable, so it can't go there, and there are good reasons for that. In going out there, I had trouble parking, I blocked traffic. I was just trying to find a spot, and I can imagine what it's somewhat difficult with the 10, 12, 14 children now, but what's going to happen if you try to go to 40? I could not handle the traffic. Also, I think the changes that are being dictated, should you go to 40, would deter the good job that you can do because of the way the facility is now. You have room for the kids to play. It can manage the number of people that you're legally allowed to have there now. But if you parked 5 vehicles and brought in 40 children, no matter how you stagger the parking or time the playing in the yard with the potential of 40 children, I just don't think this site could accommodate that. And I also, I could go down the list on the findings. In no way can I find any of the findings. There is no practical hardship. It's something that's being caused by the applicant. Just down the line, it does not meet findings, and it can be stated such for all 4 findings that they cannot be met. So, based on that, I similarly feel that I would not support this action.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Sheets. I am going to echo and frankly repeat a number of the things that my fellow commissioners have said. We've heard some wonderful testimonials. I have no doubt, and I'm totally willing to concede, that the current operation is loving, it's caring, it's safe, and a tremendous facility. That said, however, at some point there is a limitation to what an existing specific site can adequately do. And given the constraints of this site, given the neighborhood, given all the problems that would occur just trying to increase the intensification of its use from daycare facility to daycare center, if I'm using the words correctly, there's just no way that I could see being able to try to shoehorn in 40 people. You've got a great facility. I understand that there's a certain financial need. There's also, let's say, a societal need for daycare. Unfortunately, this residential property and the specifics of the building just don't lend itself to it. Mr. Torgerson had suggested that maybe there was a middle step, maybe being able to intensify it from 14 to 20, but even going from 14 to 20, I also understand triggers a certain amount of financial investment that you have to do. And being able to just have 6 more kids probably doesn't pencil out, hence the idea of going to 40. I would be stunned, by the way, if the state would even allow that many people. I think you've got too many site constraints in terms of square footage, in terms of path of travel, between the parking, between the required playground areas. I don't think you'd ever get anywhere close to 40 with the state, but beyond that, just working on our narrow area of responsibility, I'm going to echo what everyone else has said, that, that we're touched, and we're very, very pleased that you have such a wonderful facility, but we're just not able to allow you to intensify or add any more kids to it. With that said, unless there's something else to add from any of the commissioners, can we have a motion?
I'll make the motion.
Mr. Lee.
Upon review and consideration of all materials and exhibits of a current record relative to use variance case number PVAR 2009-013, located at 809 East Lomita Avenue, and after having conducted a hearing on said matter, that the Planning Commission hereby denies said use variance case number PVAR 2009-013 in accord with the findings set forth below. And those findings are A, B, C, D.
Would you like me to just take the findings that I made during my presentation and use those? Because right now we have a statement, but there's no supporting documentation. Would you like me to add the support? So, for instance, for finding A, no practical difficulty because the site is currently developed as a large family daycare in accordance when uses are already consistent with the zoning. And there is also zoning in the neighborhood that provides for large family daycare, however it may not, or a commercial daycare, however it may not be exactly on this property. So that would be a hardship. And then for number 2, there are no exceptional circumstances or conditions applicable to the property involved that do not generally apply to other property in the same zone or neighborhood. Because this is a regularly shaped, flat, rectangular lot currently used as a single-family residence, which is what is permissible under the zone. C, the granting the variance may be detrimental to public welfare injurious to the property improvements in the neighborhood because this property can cause traffic and parking impacts. The circulation with the parking to the rear is inadequate to handle pickup and drop-off of children. Children would not have an outdoor play area as they have now, and additionally, the on-site parking appears inadequate to handle employees and the handicapped as shown on the site plan. And then D, the proposal is contrary to the objectives of the zoning code as the project does not appear to meet minimum landscaping requirements and they do not exceed or do not meet required parking requirements as depicted on the site plan.
Does that serve as a fair summation of your feelings?
Yes.
And so you'd like to incorporate that into the motion?
I'd like to incorporate the comments that was made by the staff into the findings.
Thank you.
All right. Support, please.
Second it.
I have a motion and support. Call roll.
Commissioner Sheets.
Aye.
Commissioner Torgerson.
Aye.
Commissioner Lee.
Aye.
Chair Kane.
Aye. So on a vote of 4-0, use case variance PVAR 2009-013 has been denied. Under the provisions of Chapter 2.88 of the Glendale Municipal Code, any person affected by the decision of the Commission has the right to appeal said determination to the City Council if they believe that the decision is in error or that procedural errors have occurred, or if there's substantial new evidence which could not have been reasonably presented at the hearing. An appeal must be filed within 15 days following the actual date of such action. Information regarding appeals in the appeal forms will be provided upon request and must be filed in the Permit Services Center, 633 East Broadway, Room 101, together with the required filing fee of $650 for such an appeal. Their telephone number is 818-548-3200. With that, we'll move on to old business.
Thank
you. Being that you're here, Mr. Kraus, I'm presuming you'd like us to go with 7A?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Now, let me introduce it for a moment. It's Zoning Code Amendment Case PZON 2009-002. This was continued from October 21st, 2009, and it is amendments to Title 16 of the Glendale Municipal Code, 1995, related to subdivisions and lot line adjustments. Mr. Krause.
Chairman Kane, members of the Commission, as you've indicated, this is a proposal to modify Title 16, which is pretty much all of our subdivision requirements, and technically it's also, by reference, certain parts of it are the zoning code. What I've done with the draft ordinance is included everything, the entire Title 16, whether it's being amended or not, just so you can see the context. What this ordinance is 99% housekeeping, in that we're moving things around to better improve the order. So that you have things related to tentative maps before you have standards related to final maps in the code. We're changing a few titles, we're changing some of the capitalization, and updating some other things. So there's only one thing that I don't consider housekeeping or something that is attempting to be consistent with either some of our other procedures or with state law. So let me just highlight what I've indicated in the staff report. Again, bullet point 1 is organization and code references have been modified. So by moving things around, we've changed some of the code sections and some of the references to other code sections. I will skip the next one because that's the one that isn't really a cleanup item. Third bullet point is when we have lot line adjustments, our current code requires that in order to implement those that are actually approved, we record a quote-unquote record of survey map, what in fact we have been doing since the mid-'80s when the lot line adjustment process was created, actually recording certificates of compliance, which instead of being a map is a document that has the property owners and basically a legal description rather than a map, although sometimes we have a map as a reference attachment. So that was in response to the county recorder giving us some difficulty in trying to record those maps. So this is what others do. This is what we've been doing. So we just wanted to clean up the code to reflect that what the code reflects is actually what we're doing. Next bullet point is requiring a 3 by 4 foot public notice sign be posted by applicants for tentative tract maps and tentative parcel maps. Right now, there is actually no site posting requirement in our code. As you know, there's usually three forms that public notices take. You've got notification of property owners, publishing in the newspaper, and then posting of the site. Most of the planning-related, zoning-related applications, we use all three, but not all of them. So I think what was happening in the past is we were in fact posting the sites anyway, or the city clerk was when we just had the city posted small notices. But since most of that changed to these larger 3 by 4 foot public notice signs recently, that hasn't been happening. So this would be consistent. It's the same wording as on variance cases, conditional use permits, and design review, and parking reduction requests. So that is a change. So that would require, again, the applicant to post these signs, just like all of our other applications. So again, that would be for tentative tract maps and tentative parcel maps. Next point is the public notice for tentative parcel maps is being increased from 300 foot to a 500 foot radius for notification of property owners. This is something we probably should have already done with one of our other changes. It's already that way for tentative tract maps. For some reason it didn't get changed for tentative parcel maps. So again, just cleaning that up. The next one, again, is sort of a technical thing, changing the code to be consistent with the state. Our code says that tentative maps have to be, final maps have to be approved by the city council when it's a tentative tract map. This isn't exactly the same as for parcel maps. They have to be approved by the city council within 3 years or whatever extension period is granted prior to the expiration of that. What the state law actually says is the map, the final map, has to be accepted by the city engineer in this case. There is a difference between that. So the state law being more permissive, we can't really go against that. So what this is doing is just using the same terminology. There's a list of things that the city engineer has to do to accept the map. That's not really changing. So it's just really the that one phrase to be consistent with the Subdivision Map Act. Okay, the next point is time extension requests. Right now, we have in the code the possibility of coming to whoever approved the map, which is quite often yourselves, and ask for an extension prior to the initial period of time, which right now is 3 years, notwithstanding whatever the state grants. But tentative parcel maps, tentative tract maps have a 3-year initial period to complete the final map. Right now, we can ask for an extension of 5 years, up to 5 years, on a final tract map, and we're going to up that to 6 years, consistent with what the state law is. And on the tentative parcel maps, we're changing it from 3 years to 6 years. Right now, the state law used to be 5 years for both. We changed it for the tentative tract map, but we didn't change it for the parcel map. So now, with these changes, both the extension periods are going to be 6 years, and you'll be able to come more than once, again, which is also consistent with the state law. It's not exactly the way our wording for the tentative tract maps is right now. So it's going to be the same. You'll still have the ability to make a judgment as to whether or not you grant that. That's not changing. It's just the maximum period of time that you can grant a time extension for a tentative map is being increased, consistent with the changes in the state law. Now back to the second bullet point, which is really the thing that really isn't housekeeping or being consistent with other regulations, and that has to do with lot line adjustments. This is something the City Council wanted us to look at after they heard an appeal on a denied lot line adjustment in the past. Lot line adjustments are ministerial actions according to the State Subdivision Map Act. Technically, lot line adjustments are not quote-unquote subdivisions, but everything related to that is in the Subdivision Map Act, and same thing it's here in Title 16. So even though they're not technically subdivisions, they're the same animal. So the state has dictated that that lot line adjustments are ministerial, which means you can only apply minimum standards of the building code and the zoning code. So if it's not discretionary, you can't decide whether this is a good place to put a property line or not. You're going by wherever we have minimums. Let's say minimum lot size, minimum lot width, placement of property lines in some cases. So it's unfortunate that we can't use more judgment, but it is what it is. So right now, we have had cases, right now we have minimum lot sizes in some zones, but not in most of them. So let's say if it's an R1 lot line adjustment, minimum lot size is 5,500 square feet. So if both lots, or however many lots you're dealing with, don't end up with that lot size, can't do it. Lot width, there isn't any minimum in the single-family zone. R1R, ROS, there is. There's both a minimum lot size of 12,000 and a minimum lot width of 100 feet, or 80 feet if it's at the bulb of a cul-de-sac. Council years ago actually changed, we have two minimums now. We have the minimum under certain conditions. When you do a lot line adjustment, it's only 7,500. Okay? That was to accommodate some of these little adjustments to get around things that were done in the past. Well, that's kind of what we're doing now with proposing to change the lot width standard a little bit. We've had cases in the past where people have tried to adjust property lines, but they haven't affected their lot widths, anything to do with the property lines near the street whatsoever. For example, two back-to-back lots might want to adjust the rear property line, and if they aren't, and if it's in the R1R or ROS zone, and if both lots aren't 100 feet wide, we can't approve it. Well, council thought, well, maybe we should be a little more liberal on that, but let's be careful, because if you open it up too much, then pretty soon we have to approve anything and everything. So this is sort of a compromise without, it deals with most of the problem situation. So what we're proposing here is to actually amend, to put a clause in the Title 16 that says if you're doing a lot line adjustment and you're not changing the lot width, that's okay. In other words, you can't make it bigger without actually meeting the minimum standard. If you're leaving it alone, that's okay. So that's one step above where we're at now. That would allow us to approve some of the ones that we've had in the past, and we'll take care of, I think, most of the situations that are relatively harmless in terms of that. So you're not really, with a lot line adjustment, you're never creating any new lots. You're either keeping the same, you're starting with 4 or fewer lots, and you're ending up with the same or fewer lots than you started with. So that's the extent of lot line adjustments. So we feel that this isn't going to do any harm because it essentially reflects the current situation with regard to the lot widths. And yet it doesn't open everything up for grabs to where we have no choice whatsoever. So that is that. Again, it's a lot of pages, but again, a lot of it is, changing a couple of the titles. Again, I just changed Director of Planning is going to become Director of Community Planning next month, so that's in here.
Building official.
Building official, we've already got. Director of Public Service is General Manager of Glendale Water and Power. A few things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's it. It wasn't intended to overhaul any of the standards whatsoever. That's a whole different thing. The hillside ordinance still continues on a different path. Our community plans are still going, so any one of those could cause further changes in this. But for right now, this, with the exception of the lot line adjustment clause, is generally housekeeping. So we're recommending that you recommend to the City Council that they approve this draft ordinance.
All right. Questions for Mr. Kraus? My only comment is, as I've reviewed the changes, your bullet points have fairly and completely identified what you've changed.
Yeah,
I don't see any oversight. What I'm seeing is what you've presented.
Yeah, I tried to only bullet the obvious. Again, you see a lot of capitals being added. Our old code had this format of non-capitalization, which I always thought was very strange. So where we're touching these sections, whether it's the zoning code or this, we're trying to make it regular English.
It was written by E.E. Cummings.
That's right. Yeah. I think we did have a contract.
All right. If there's no further discussion, then I'll entertain a motion, please.
I move that upon consideration of the proposed ordinance relating to subdivisions and lot line adjustments, the Planning Commission hereby recommends that the City Council adopt the proposed amendments to Title 16 of the Glendale Municipal Code, comma 1995.
And I'll second that motion.
A motion and a second. Please call roll.
Commissioner Sheets.
Aye.
Commissioner Torgerson.
Aye.
Chair Kane.
Aye, on a vote of 3-0, zoning code amendment case PZON 2009-002 has been recommended to council for adoption. And, gosh, gentlemen, I think maybe we want to continue the next one for maybe the next meeting.
Yeah, I think that'd be a good idea.
I think so.
All right. I just had to do that to you, Mr. Hamilton. The next item is 7B. It's zoning code amendment case PZON 2009-004, which we did continue from the past meeting of October 21st. The location citywide, and its amendment to Title 30 of the Glendale Municipal Code 1995 to adopt a reasonable accommodation ordinance. Mr. Hamilton?
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, staff proposes that the City adopt a reasonable accommodation ordinance in order to provide a method for persons with a disability to seek relief from city regulations which might have the effect of interfering with their ability to use and enjoy a dwelling in the city. This is in response to a recommendation by the Attorney General in 2001 and implements a program from the recently adopted housing element. The reason the Attorney General made his opinion is that in the absence of a reasonable accommodation ordinance, it's his opinion that cities may be at risk of lawsuit from people with persons with a disability if they cannot achieve relief in some way alternative to a variance procedure, some simpler method. Other cities have adopted these ordinances, but actual experience with the ordinances is fairly limited. Staff relied on a model ordinance drafted by a group called Mental Health Advocacy Services to create our ordinance, also following examples from some other cities. The proposed process would be similar to an administrative exception process. There'd be an application with some information gathered about the proposal. This would be submitted along with a fee. It would be subject to consideration by the zoning administrator who would render a decision sometime after the decision was made. The submittal was made. The decision would be subject to a variety of findings, most of which come straight out of the model ordinance. You have before you, in your packet, you should have 2 letters, including the one that we received fairly recently from Shelter Partnership, who has been urging us to adopt something along these lines. They generally agree with our approach, except for a few objections. They think that we should have a fairly limited time frame to render a decision. We don't think that necessarily it's helpful to constrain the city in that way. They also think that it's not reasonable for us to require a fee. It's staff's opinion that if staff is expending time on this, a reasonable fee would be reasonable. And we're anticipating that the fee would probably be the lower of the 2 administrative exception fees, which is roughly in the $500 range, if I remember right. I think that generally summarizes their objections at this point. There is no real right answer as to exactly what the ordinance should contain. So at this point, it is up to your judgment as to what we will recommend to City Council. Do you have any comments or questions? Yes.
Mr. Torgerson.
In the section that you've added for findings,
yeah,
finding number E, or letter E.
Yes.
If the administrator grants or grants with modifications the request shall be granted to an individual and shall not run with the land. I have no problem with that. Unless the administrator also finds that the modification is physically integrated into the structure and cannot be easily removed or altered to comply with city zoning regulations or policies. That would seem to say that, let me just ask the question if I understand this. If I had a house and I poured a concrete wheelchair ramp down the front of the street, and then the person living in that house who needed that ramp moved out, the next owner, since the privilege doesn't go with the land, the next owner might find it impossible to remove the concrete because the administrator found that the modification is physically integrated into the structure?
That's possible, but that might be an example also where the zoning administrator might modify the request and say, instead of a concrete ramp, could we do it with a wood ramp that could be more easily removed afterwards?
Well, whether or not it's easy to remove, this clause almost makes it sound like you could not remove it.
It's the judgment of the zoning administrator as to whether the request is so integrated into the building, into the proposal, that it should run with the land and then does not need to be removed. To me, the classic example is I want to do a room addition that extends within a setback that is clearly completely integrated into the structure, and we would not be wanting to go out there with a chainsaw and pull that off just after the person leaves. It becomes a gray area, though, on ramps and things like this, as to whether that's so integrated that it should stay.
I'm not saying that we should require it to be removed. I'm just thinking that I don't want to see something that would prohibit it from being removed by the next owner.
You're thinking the default is it stays.
Right.
I read it that the default is it goes unless there's a good reason for it to stay. The intent is that
that is the intent.
That is the intent. Then I'm fine with
that it goes unless there's a good reason for it to stay.
So at least one of us read it differently. So let's make sure it's clear in the final draft that that statement is, what the default position is.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
I don't even know how to state it as a question. That same finding, I'm really not clear on what the criteria would be for adding to the structure, beyond the setback restrictions or whatever. And I mean, clearly, if I add to the back of my house or add to my garage for a room, all the facilities to house somebody with a handicap, I'm not going to remove it. And I'm okay with doing that. It's just that I know that I'm not going to remove it, and then that person is not going to be there forever.
Yes.
And is that a license to do bad things?
There's so little experience on this. I wish I could offer you more guidance about what will work and what won't work.
My concern is I know within my neighborhood 4 illegal adds to garages that violate everything, and they're still in place and they've all been reported. And I also know the process that it takes to follow through on that, and I also know that the courts, in most cases, in these cases and many others in our city, leave the burden to the city to accommodate that individual and essentially do not take it down. And these people have done it illegally. So I see I see a dichotomy here. I see what the intent of this legislation is. I also know we have some real problems in our city, and I don't want the two to cross.
The more that we deviate from the model ordinance, I think the more risk the city is at to be sued by somebody down the road. Again, what the shelter partnership group would like is actually for this to be over the counter and not have a deliberative process and not even have a fee. We think that's a little bit quick and doesn't allow for proper deliberation. And I think we do think it's reasonable that the zoning administrator, for example, consider potential alternatives. Because let's say somebody proposed to convert the garage because that's the only conceivable place that they could have living quarters for a disabled relative. Well, the zoning administrator may look at the site and say, well, why can't we do a small room addition out to the back? Or why couldn't we even have perhaps a freestanding guest house out in the back and not touch the garage? That's why we think it's important to give the zoning administrator the opportunity to consider the request and consider feasible alternatives and modify the request if necessary. That puts us at risk, a little bit more risk than just accepting what is proposed. But I don't know that there's any better balancing act out there to offer to you.
Using, and the garage is a great example. In the information you've given us, Exhibit 1, it's examples of reasonable accommodation from California cities. And without knowing, obviously, the details of the specific situation, I look at several of these, and especially as it relates to converting garages and doing things like that, I find that, again, the argument is defining reasonable. And, it's the eye of the beholder and all those other cliches you can attach to it. But the whole idea of what's reasonable in converting a garage, I mean, that to me would require a very high standard of what is reasonable. I mean, you'd have to really dig into the square footage and the layout of the house and really prove it, and then there's going to be an argument, and there's going to be lawsuits from this, no matter what we do. My question here is, with Exhibit 1 being an attachment, is this going to be an actual attachment to the ordinance?
No.
Or is this just for background for us?
This is to inform you and eventually the City Council about the kinds of items.
I think we can't plan for every eventuality, because as soon as we think of 4 things, the 5th thing will come up. But and maybe there's no better way of pinning it down, but I'd like to think, and maybe staff had this conversation, that there has to be a way, almost beyond the, throwing the finger up in the air and seeing how the wind's blowing or whatever, dartboard, any of those other type of random type of things, where, okay, somebody wants to convert a garage. Okay, before that person converts a garage, they have to demonstrate, and there should be a criteria put in place, and probably in the ordinance, that there should be a criteria for a garage conversion. And it's not reasonable for these people to convert a garage if they have a 3-bedroom home and there's only 3 people in the home, for example. That I'd like to see a criteria against conversions and additions based on the existing number of bedrooms, let's say, and the existing occupant load of the home. That would be reasonable to put in as some sort of criteria.
Not necessarily a bad idea. We have in the housing element, we suggested, or we said that we would have this done by the end of the year. Laura, correct me if I'm wrong. If we miss that deadline, there's no real penalty, right?
No real penalty, as long as we're making an effort.
Yeah, so if you want to do that, I don't think that's a bad idea at all. I think having some criteria, some guidance to both staff and applicants might be reasonable. But then the way I would do this, because I don't think staff can necessarily provide a whole lot of insight on their own, I would actually go back to Shelter Partnership as a willing, participant in this, and maybe consult with them and see if they would be willing to work up some guidelines with us.
Well, and continue surveying, our, other cities and seeing how they're solving it.
We could dig deeper into that with the other cities.
That's the flashpoint for me, is additions and conversions that really impact other people's quality of life. And, at that point, is that a reasonable accommodation? And so developing criteria that make it less subjective, where you can't have a particular applicant coming in and having a zoning administrator or a hearing officer make a decision and have that person go, I'm being discriminated against, because I'm an albino, or for whatever reason, that they're feeling they're discriminated against. The more empirical and the more reasoned and the more criteria we have in place, the less likely you're going to have the subjectivity coming into question.
Sounds reasonable.
So any other things?
Just my add on that exact point would be, and it's right along the lines that I was thinking, I understand the reasoning to put this kind of ordinance or zoning or whatever in place. But what I don't, and back to my original statement, one of my other statements about a license to do something wrong, as Chairman Kane said, both sides have an obligation. So if I have a 3-bedroom house, they have an obligation to use that house effectively before, in that structure and that property, before they then default to, I'm going to have to do these things that are out of line. So that's what I'm hearing him say, and that's what I would expect to come back from these changes. That everything, all the criteria has to be met. You have to try to do your best, and beyond that, now we'll do everything we can to accommodate this individual or this household. And I think that's what the legislation is trying to do. Sometimes, as cities, we try to go too far the other way. It says, we don't want to get hit, we don't want to have a legal suit, and I don't think we should back down that far. So I'm just reiterating what he said.
Not ready to back down yet.
Well, we may have to, but I'd rather take the stand that I don't think we have to until we're back down.
This is fun. This is good guidance from the Commission.
I appreciate the Shelter Partnership's concern over time frame. Only because, again, it opens the door for, it's the same thing that happened with solar, where, cities can just sort of throw up a roadblock and hope it all goes away, and suddenly a year passes and so on. I think 30 days is unreasonable, but, there ought to be some sort of, I think establishing some sort of, at least process with the typical, let's say, response time, that the city would be expected to respond in approximately 45 days, dependent on holidays, depending on workload, depending on, whatever conditions, the complexity of the request. To leave it open-ended does leave it open for abuse.
The practical reality is the zoning administrator usually in these kinds of, on an AE renders a decision within a couple of weeks of holding the hearing.
That's
So-
the usual. So, if you use words like usually
Yeah.
without shall,
Well, I like
words
that.
like shall, but use words like would usually, or approximately. And just so that it's not open-ended.
We can certainly put that into a guideline. We're going to have a booklet or a guideline that we hand out to front people at the counter. That kind of information, along with criteria, easily go into that kind of a guideline at the counter.
And then, as far as the fee, if there's a cost to the city for something to be done, the city needs to be reimbursed. Absolutely. It's reasonable for reasonable accommodation for those people to pay a reasonable fee.
Thank you.
Any other comments from fellow commissioners? Other than everybody going harump and nodding their heads, I think.
This is
I didn't say harump.
This is probably going to take staff a fair amount of time to work on a revised version of this with what you're talking about. So I don't think it would be, unless we pick a date fairly far out, I don't think we should necessarily pick a date certain. I would, if you wanted to, if you're inclined to, because it would make noticing and whatnot a little bit easier, it would save us a little bit of money, I would pick something 2 or even 3 months out probably, so that staff has enough time to work on
I'd be
this.
willing to look at something in January for 2 reasons. One, I know the holidays interfere, but I don't think we're asking for a reinvention. I mean, we're saying, okay, think through some of the criteria. Think through the hurdles, the reasonable hurdles, before somebody could convert a garage. So think through the reasonable hurdles for an addition, or whatever it happens to be.
Perhaps the second meeting in January?
January 20th?
And the other reason I like it is it shows that we're actually moving forward. And it was just the collision of the holidays and workload that's pushed it out a little bit. Because we are honestly trying to move forward.
If I might
Mr.
add, I
Sheets?
don't know whether it'll help your actions or not. The council has spoken about this exact issue relative to the garages, the illegal ads. And there are some views. So whether that would help your research or help you develop criteria based on past minutes, I would just offer that.
Okay.
There have been specific statements about problems with that whole issue.
This should be under Planning Commissioner remarks, but I'm going to say it now. I think it would be great if the Glendale Homeowners Coordinating Council would create a group and start paying attention to all those illegal conversions that are affecting our neighborhoods. And I can't believe that they don't pay any attention to that problem.
I thoroughly and completely agree.
Anyway, and I apologize
I'll
because
defer to
it's a little off the
It's a good
subject.
point.
But as the chairman, sometimes I get to do that. And as the commissioner, sometimes I get to do it. All right, so can we have a motion? No, it'll be a motion to continue to date certain. What is the second meeting?
January 20th?
I'll move that we move this zoning code amendment case number PZON 2009-004 to a date certain of January
January 20th?
2010. Without
the year 2010.
without further notice.
Without further notice.
And I'll second that
We have
motion.
a motion support call roll, please.
Commissioner Sheets,
Aye.
Aye.
Chair King.
Aye, and a vote of 3-0, zoning code amendment case PZON 2009-004 is continued to January 20th, 2010, without further notice. Planning Department updates.
At this point, we don't have anything further. Nothing new.
Nothing new, okay. And what's on the agenda for the next meeting?
On the next meeting, I believe we have 4 items. We have a use variance at 601 South Brand that was continued from
Continued.
October 7th. We have a 1408 Valley View that was continued from October 21st. And I believe there's 2 other ones. I don't have them written down in my book right
Are
now.
they appeals?
No, they're not appeals. I believe
And is it December?
If we have,
Milka
December 2nd. Oh, we do have appeals in December. But as far as, before as
November 18th.
I only have 2 written down, but I believe there's 4 on the board.
Well, and again, just in terms of time and effort, is if we have 2 appeals on a given day, great. If we have 2 appeals with a couple other items, we always should look seriously at moving to 4 as a general statement because of the time involved with some of the appeals.
I don't have a problem with that.
So,
I mean, I know in
right-
December we have 2.
I mean, right now for November 18th, I'm hearing that 5 o'clock is a reasonable meeting time. Is that what we're hearing, Laura?
Yeah, I believe 5 o'clock is fine.
Okay. Then we'll worry about it after that. But-
Also, just so you know, on the 18th of November, there's a big conference that's in Ontario. It's on the sustainable communities for SB 375. So I know a lot of staff will be going there. So it's going to run till 2 o'clock. We've been invited by SCAG to do a presentation because of our Compass Blueprint Award. So I know we'll have a lot of staff gone. It would be hard for us to actually have an earlier meeting that day simply because we'll all be in Ontario.
It's fine. It's fine. 5 o'clock it is. And if we get, yes, and if we get too tired, we'll just continue after that. All right. Comments from commissioners? Mr. Sheets.
With all the boards and commissions that we have, it seems that we're consistently having an overlap of sessions which creates a traffic jam in the parking area.
Yeah. This is a city clerk problem. He's the one that handles that. And we need enforcement down there.
Yeah.
There's cars down there that don't belong, and then we're parking places we're not supposed to.
And one of the departments is using it for plants, work vehicles, signs, something has, if they're all legitimate, that's fine, then we need more parking spaces. Otherwise, we're roaming around trying to steal somebody's parking spot, and I don't think it's appropriate. So if you could help us with that.
Yeah, would you let the city clerk know that we need enforcement on meeting days?
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think you overlap with the Parks Commission.
Yeah, well,
They're going right before you.
whoever it is. I mean, and it's not, they're not taking our spots. They're
just
not
not
taking
enough.
our spots. They're commissioners. But we have limited commission spots, and then when people poach, then we're starting to park in van pool spots and places that we're not supposed to.
A mayor's spot.
Not planning to go there.
Not planning to go there.
All right.
That's all I have.
Anything else, you guys?
Nope.
Motion to adjourn?
I moved.
We are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.